Welcome back, everyone. I hope that you're all now feeling refreshed and ready for the rest of the afternoon conference sessions. The next session is our second panel discussion of the day, and we'll explore how we can support underrepresented groups to put themselves forward to the leadership roles. So I'd like to welcome Sandra Kerr, who will chair this session, and our speakers, Dr. Shakir Mohammed, Dr. Ellen McCormack, Professor Paul Upchurch, and Faye Banks. Thank you.
Thank you. So my name's Sandra Kerr, and I am the Race Equality Director for Business in the Community, and I actually sit on the Diversity Committee for the Royal Society. And in my day job, I work with employers from the public and private sector who recognise that race equality is good for the UK economy, it's morally right, it's the right thing to do, and makes absolute business sense. And we have just recently had launched the Race at Work Charter, and the fifth commitment is about progressing talent in the workplace. So really topical issue that we're discussing this afternoon, and I'm looking forward to hearing the stories from our panellists. So can I ask, first of all, our panellists to introduce themselves, and we start with Paul.
Hello, my name is Paul Upchurch. I am Head of Department for the Department of Earth Sciences at University College London. From a fairly early age, I've had a major visual impairment, so as well as during my day job, keeping my staff in order and playing with dinosaurs, I also have a long-standing interest in diversity issues with an inevitable bias towards disability, but I think once you start looking at some of these issues, you realise there are a lot of commonalities there.
Good afternoon, I'm Faye Banks. My role is Director of Energy for Costain. My story is around improving social mobility, coming from a disadvantaged background.
Hi, my name is Shakir Mohammed. I'm a research scientist at DeepMind, where I work towards building general-purpose learning algorithms, so the work of artificial intelligence. At DeepMind, I lead our LGBT research employer resource group, and I also lead another independent grassroots organization, which is called the Deep Learning Indaba, which is about strengthening machine learning across Africa, the continent where I'm from. And I hope to tell you a bit more about that later on.
Hello, I'm Dr. Ellen McCormack, and I'm a Royal Society Dorothy Hodgkin Research Fellow, which means that I'm a scientist at the Rutherford Appleton Laboratory.
Okay, so for this session, we're going to really explore what more the scientific community can do to support underrepresented groups into leadership positions and what has helped the panellists to succeed in their own careers. So first up, can we welcome Shakir Mohammed?
I am super excited to be here. So thank you to all the organizers of this year's annual conference for the invitation, this very special opportunity to speak to you all. My aim today is just to spark a bit of a discussion, and I wanted to give two readings of this question. One, an optimistic reading around our role in restoring self-confidence to underrepresented groups, but also a second, more critical reading that casts this question as one that detracts us from asking the question of who is responsible for change. So I hope we'll do that. So as we begin, I want you just to think about the journey that is taken by the underrepresented groups we might have in mind. Some of the stories we've heard of this morning, and so just journey really matters. So the people we think of, they, like me, may come from the other end of the world. They may come from the southern tip of Africa. They may be born into a town that is shaped by segregation, come from an education system that could never inspire greatness, yet somehow come to hold the doctoral degree from our ancient university in Cambridge. They, like me, may be born and live in a time where to be colored is to live and accept with overt and covert discrimination and disadvantage, yet somehow come to add new thought to their field of science. They, like me, may have to overcome shame and rejection and confusion, learn to understand and embrace themselves, to embrace their queerness, and then somehow use that to strengthen their institutional culture. So stories like mine They are our struggle credentials. This room is filled with struggle credentials. Struggle credentials play too much of a role in our present. So the success of our work will mean that over time, it will become more difficult to attain these struggle credentials. But the attainment of struggle credentials does emphasize an important transformation that occurs along this journey. And these journeys emphasize the creation, or better yet, the restoration of self-confidence and self-ownership. And when the question of decolonization of science and of our thinking is made, it is restoration that is meant. So this becomes the first part of our effort, the restoration of self-confidence and self-ownership, and to instill that uniformly across groups. So if I think about this question in my own area of artificial intelligence, I will often ask it in a very different way. The artificial intelligence that we believe to be global is not. It is localized in individuals, in institutions, in countries. How do we make global AI truly global? So that is the question. And of course, we can replace artificial intelligence with any other area of science or endeavor. About 2.5 years ago, I created a new organization called the Deep Learning Indaba, as one attempt to answer this question. The Deep Learning Indaba is a grassroots movement whose aim is to strengthen African machine learning. And we do this by building communities, creating leadership, and recognizing excellence in research and innovation across our African continent. This year alone, we solidified the confidence of 550 of the brightest African AI talent at our annual gathering. These future leaders have entered the conversation around artificial intelligence, their skills, and their contributions to their societies. This triumvirate of community, of leadership, of recognition is what I consider as the basis of a self-supporting ecosystem that builds itself, puts itself forward, and claims its ownership in the field of artificial intelligence. As we hoped, this philosophy is being replicated. Communities are being built, and ownership is being taken globally. Earlier this year in Eastern Europe, next June in Southeast Asia, next November in South America, and hopefully soon in South Asia. Global AI is now taking its transformative steps to becoming truly global. One of the lessons here is on the importance of grassroots organizations and their collective role in putting forward and supporting diverse candidates. The grassroots are those groups within our organizations, like the LGBT Employer Resource Group I lead within DeepMind, but also those external groups like the Deep Learning Indaba. One of the clear strategies we have available to us is to consider the support we offer to grassroots groups through supporting their creation, through our funding, sharing our leadership and expertise with our time and network, and in all the small, simple encouragements that people need to continue the work of true transformation. So, support the grassroots. My second question is a bit different. This question in me creates discomfort, and perhaps that is its intention. And this discomfort develops because, for me, it reveals other uncomfortable questions. Who exactly are the underrepresented groups that we have in mind? What systems of power are at play and presupposed by this question? Why can't these underrepresented groups put themselves forward? What does forward mean? To what? To where? Or before whom? Can be very insidious. So the problem with this original question for me is that it is unquestioning in its outcome. It is the underrepresented group that must be put forward. It is they who must change. It is they who eventually become equal to we who are represented. It is problematic because the value system of we that might find ourselves currently represented remains intact and sustained. It releases the represented from responsibility. The questions we ask must instead be recentered on ourselves. Each of us must assume a personal responsibility for transformation, and the questions we ask must prevent us from seeking release from this responsibility. So some alternative questions. How diverse was the team of collaborators in our last few projects or papers? Just thinking about that will tell you a lot. Do the events we speak at have the representation we expect or demand? When we organize events, how do we ensure inclusivity and reflect the real forms of excellence that exist? We should all keep a log of our activities in this regard and use that log to inform how we make decisions and to assess our performance. What are the ways in which we question our own settled assumptions of people and systems? Simply asking these questions provides us with a personal strategy for change. And so, a key principle is revealed. The work of transformation lives in the mundane. Our personal responsibility is taken in the everyday, in the simple decisions, in the small actions and reactions. When transformation lives in the mundane, it becomes magnified in the larger structural and organizational systems that we influence. But transformation living in the mundane means that our effort will not be without sacrifice, not without struggle. We who have the privilege of representation will have to give up our place. We will have to give up our recognition. We will have to at times not be recognized at all. We will need to divert power away from ourselves towards others. Our human nature means that this will be amongst the highest prices we could ever be asked to pay. But it is ours to pay now, and a debt to the future we can erase. So my aim has been to put forward two principles for our debate. Firstly, the restoration of self-ownership and self-confidence and the importance of the grassroots. And secondly, on personal responsibilities and the price of transformation. For everything we will be asked to pay, there is a reward, and that is a source of sustainable and lasting joy. And I think we experience some of that joy in the celebration and the recognition of progress that has brought us all here today. So I hope for, I work towards, and I expect much more joy to come. Again, thank you for this wonderful opportunity and for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Victor. Can I ask Ilin to come up next, please?
Great. So I'm not sure if I can match that enthusiasm, I'm afraid. It was amazing. Okay, so I'm Ellie, and I'm here to talk to you today about a programme that I attended a few years ago called Sustain. And hopefully, by the end of the short talk, I can persuade you that programmes such as Sustain give us female researchers the tools that are required in order to be successful leaders. Okay, Sustain is run by the Academy of Medical Sciences, and it's supported by the MRC, the Royal Society, and the Royal Academy of Engineering. So currently, female researchers that have a fellowship or a grant award from one of these organisations can apply for Sustain, and round 3 has just opened up. But I was part of the first year, so here we are. There's 20 of us, and we were all broadly in the same career stage, so early career researchers. So I'm going to be telling you about Sustain from all of our opinions and what we saw the most useful aspects of it. Okay, so broadly, Sustain consisted of a year-long course of many, many courses and mentoring. So the courses were of a very high quality, and they were tailored especially for us so that we felt like we got a lot out of them. So I'm going to be telling you kind of the highlights from every course that we went on. Okay, so we learned how to give very concise and clear presentations and how to engage with the audience when we talk about our research. So very many of us had other responsibilities outside of the work, such as looking after children. And so we were taught how to manage our time effectively, both at work and at home. Okay, so we were taught how to write a successful grant application and how to position ourselves so that we can attract funding. So this was done by a group of academics coming down and telling us exactly what they expect to see in a successful grant application and what not to write in a grant application. And so then this message was kind of conveyed to us by looking at very many examples of grants. Okay, so there was a course on how to set up and maintain a research group. And so this was all the way from writing a job description for a researcher, from reading the CVs, to conducting interviews, and then once you have your research team, how to maintain it effectively. So we were taught about all the different personalities that you'd expect to see in a team and how to look after and encourage these different types of personalities for the good of the whole team. Okay, so we were taught about different leadership styles and what works and what really doesn't work and the kind of leader that we would like to become. So, for example, we really enjoyed in this course as well how to deal with conflict and how to do this constructively. Okay, so we also attended a course on career progression and how this can be aligned with who you are, so your values. And if your values don't correspond to the career that you have, that you can't be as successful as you'd like to be. And so we should look forward into the future at where we want to be in our career, taking into account these values. Okay, so all these courses were very, very interesting, but for me and a few others, our favourite course was where I think maybe an ex-actor or dancer came for an afternoon and taught us essentially how to act. So he got us walking around a big room and he taught us how to walk confidently, how to talk confidently, how to smile with gravitas. And the point here was that you could just act the part. And so even if you don't feel confident inside, it doesn't matter because people expect to see these qualities in a leader. And I know that quite a few of us have used some of these techniques and have really seen a difference in the way that people respond to us, either day to day, just in the lab, or in, for example, a job interview. Okay, so we also had the chance to go on a training day in the media. And so here, we went down to some studios in London and we were interviewed by a member of the media about some science-related issues. So this is us, and this is exactly where we were. So since the training, I know that quite a few of us have actually had some interactions with the media, and because we know exactly what to expect from the media, I know that they had the maximum impact that they could from these interactions for their science. Okay, so those are all the courses that we went on throughout the year. And so the other aspect of Sustain is the year-long mentoring. And so this was broadly in two parts. So the first part was the peer-to-peer mentoring. And here we talked amongst ourselves about any problems that we had within our career or that we were having. And then we essentially tried to find solutions to these problems. So I think, so I should say it was a very non-judgmental atmosphere. And we all felt like we could talk quite openly to each other. And I feel that we all had a sense of comfort that all the problems we were going through were very similar and we were all in the same boat, so we could actually help each other out. So the other part of the mentoring, and I think the part of Sustain which received the most positive feedback at the end of the year was the one-on-one mentoring with a fellow from the Academy of Medical Sciences. So the fellows, or the mentors, were so incredibly generous with their time and with their advice. And I know that quite a few of us applied for jobs, wrote a paper, wrote that grant application, set up the website because of the encouragement that they received from our mentors. And we feel especially lucky that we were part of this relationship throughout the year. Okay, so that was Sustain in a nutshell. So I'm going to just quickly give you some idea of what I think was useful from my career. Okay, so although I've had very encouraging supervisors throughout my entire career, at the very point in my career that I really should have been thinking about becoming more independent and should have been kind of branching off with my science, I was so lucky that my supervisor turned around to me and said that he expected me to apply for fellowships, he expected me to apply for grants, and he gave me the time to go off and think about the research that I wanted to do, to go away and conduct some experiments, and then essentially with this list of the fellowships and grants that he'd given me, I just applied for some fellowships. And I was successful, and since then I've applied for a grant and I've been successful, and I now manage someone on my project, and I'm supporting this person through their fellowship application. And this is all because at the start I received a push that I really did need from a very supportive supervisor. And so I'm very thankful that I was given that opportunity. So my last point, which is going to be very obvious, but I really believe that by training female scientists with courses such as Sustain, you give us the confidence and the tools required in order to be successful researchers and successful leaders. Okay, thank you.
I think those of you who haven't put any applications in for Sustain might want to start now. It sounds wonderful. Paul, would you like to?
Thank you. I'd like to thank the organisers for inviting me to speak today. It's very different from my usual conference talks, as we'll see. When I was 3 years old, I was given this book. You collect the cards from the PG Tips tea. Other teas are available. And stick them in. And I really enjoyed the collecting aspect. But in particular, I was completely fascinated by just the cover image, what these weird, strange animals were. And this sparked a lifelong interest, not just in dinosaurs, but in the entire evolution of life and the history of the Earth, which is, I guess, why I'm now head of a science department. So here's a quick career summary, and it's a fairly conventional route for an academic of my vintage and position. A couple of degrees, a couple of fellowships or postdocs, get a lectureship, as I did 15 years ago, progress up the ranks, become professor, and eventually have your arm twisted to become head of department. But there is a bit of a bump in the road here, which is that when I was about 7 years old, my vision deteriorated extremely rapidly. Literally in a few months, went from the top of the class to the bottom. Something was clearly wrong. And after a lot of toing and froing, going to Addenbrooke's and Great Ormond Street and various hospitals, I've been diagnosed with something called cone rod dystrophy, which damages the retina and has multiple effects. Probably the worst one is that I really have very poor resolution. So what I can see at about 1 foot away is what you would probably resolve at about 60 feet away. So this obviously has a number of challenges. Now, in terms of my research, I do a variety of things. I do a lot of theoretical and methodological things because I can sit at my desk and it's relatively straightforward. But I also have a specialism on a particular group of animals. And in particular, I work on these super gigantic things called sauropod dinosaurs. I hope you can see the little human figure there. That's scaled to be 2 meters tall. These animals get up to 35 meters long, weigh 60 metric tons. Yet despite their size, that isn't actually the reason why I decided to study them, just because I cut out microscopes. It's really serendipity that I ended up being a specialist on these animals. But they do have other challenges. So you can see me in Japan there. I have quite regularly in my career climbed in and out of quarries, climbed up scaffolding. You can see in China there are lots of bones on the floor. You've got to be very careful not to tread on them. I rely on the help of colleagues to some extent to make sure this doesn't happen. If you are supposedly a world expert on a group of fossils and you turn up and destroy someone's collection, it doesn't go down too well. But let's talk about challenges more generally. As a scientist, a researcher, an academic, someone who's come up through the university system in the UK. At my head department interview, I was asked what did I think the main challenge would be. And I think they were angling for some response about time management or managing people or something, and all that's sensible and true. But I kind of ended up slightly more politely paraphrasing Bill Clinton's 1992 presidential campaign slogan, which was, "It's the economy, stupid," but replacing economy with disability. It's such a major thing, especially a visual impairment, I think, in terms of the way it impacts on doing scientific research, that it's always the major barrier, the major problem that I will think about first whenever I take on some new task. Now, in my career, I can say that, as far as I can tell, I haven't really experienced any obvious out-and-out prejudice. Now, that might be a positive thing. I'm an optimistic person. I like to believe that might be the case, but I suspect realistically what that means is that any prejudices that are out there are under the carpet and therefore insidious because they're difficult to confront. And to what extent I may have gone for certain jobs and not got them because I put in my cover letter that I have visual impairment, I don't know. It's difficult, impossible to quantify. But certainly you come across quite a few preconceptions, a certain amount of thoughtlessness. I think that's kind of inevitable, and it's just something that we have to battle. Just to pick out 4 key points from my particular experience, I put a picture of a conference I went to recently. Networking, collaboration is incredibly important as a scientist, right? Most science is done in collaborative teams. If you miss out on that, you miss out on some really important projects. I do have good collaborations, but networking is difficult. When you can't see the slides at a conference, when you're not sure where a certain person you want to talk to is in the room, and even when you find them, if you're not sure whether you can interrupt them, or if you want to join a group of people you've never met before, you can't read their name badges, all of this is a complete minefield. Okay? Then, of course, there's the imposter syndrome, which probably varies a lot from person to person. Maybe it's my particular personality type, but certainly disability doesn't help. And there's inevitable reluctance, I think, to push yourselves forward. As a scientist, you can actually measure your performance. How many papers do you have? How many citations do you have? What is your H-index? Right? Try that with your contemporaries when you have been working more slowly than them for 20 years, and it's a slightly depressing experience. Inevitably, you say to yourself, I'm not as good. And I don't think I'm being immodest by saying that if I'd been a bit more proactive, a bit more confident, I probably would have made professor something like 2 years earlier than I actually did. Not a big difference, but it is an effect. The last 2 points on the slide I think we can take together. In my experience, trying to do something that very few people have done before, i.e. be a visually impaired paleontologist, inevitably results in a lot of breaking new ground. So when I became a NERC fellow in 1999, they had no mechanism in place for supporting disabled fellows in terms of some kind of financial support for extra equipment, etc. They did have a mechanism in place for PhD students, so I asked them if I could have that, and they said yes. And a lot of my experiences are positive like that. People do tend to say yes. But the point is, I've had to do extra stuff to get that to happen. It wasn't already there. And after 25 years of breaking new ground, it gets a bit tedious, a bit exhausting, and it takes away time from other more important activities. And related to that, of course, we do have a lot of mechanisms in all big organisations, both for how they generally run, and these days for specifically related to disabled people. But again, inevitably, because we like consistency and we like rules, that we end up in a one-size-fits-all culture. And that every disabled person is different, as I'm sure you're all aware. And so you've got to go through another process of tailoring that support to your particular needs. So last slide. These are some of the things I think about. These are some of the questions that I ask myself and some of the things that I try to promote in my leadership role as head department and in terms of also supervising students and so on. First point is that we're in a much better position than we were 30, 40 years ago. There are now, we have access to work, we have personal independent plans and so on. These things get criticised in the press. They are under threat in terms of how much funding is available. But without them, and without the systems that universities have set up, basically, I think I would be unemployable in this particular context. So we have to look after those and protect and maintain them, and hopefully build them up. Second point is access for all. I had a conversation with a colleague and friend in Cambridge a few weeks ago who works on this sort of issue, and he made the point that really, we're in a system where we talk to disabled people, we ask them what they want, and then we try to give it to them as much as feasible. That sounds idyllic, right? But actually, you can go one step beyond that. Why not build accessibility into everything we do? Online resources, right through to electronic doors. It's not just disabled people that use this stuff. Electronic door is great if you've got an armful of parcels or you're pushing a pram, right? So these things that we're building for disabled people take pressure off disabled people because we don't have to ask for quite so much stuff. But also, it's useful for a wider community who also want to work in a flexible way. Role models, diversity breeds diversity, obvious points, we all know about this stuff. But on a personal note, I basically got through to the age of about 23, pretty much fueling my ambition on hope and determination. But at 23, I found out there was actually a more senior, more experienced, totally blind paleontologist in the United States. And immediately I thought, right, I can do this now. I don't have to, there's no excuses. A really important pivotal point in my career, I think. I would have made it anyway, I think, but it certainly gave me a few less sleepless nights. Fourth point, how level is your level playing field? Now, we all have mechanisms in place to try and ensure fairness, hopefully, but if you take a situation where, suppose you want to target something at young early career researchers, and you say, this is available to people within 10 years of their PhD, right? That may be unfair to some people. And we can say, okay, you've lost 2 years as a result of childcare or being a carer role. Okay, that means you can do that within 12 years of doing a PhD because you've missed out on 2 years. Fine. Fairly straightforward compensation, perhaps. But what about a disabled person? In my career, until computers started reading aloud to me, my effective reading speed was about 1/5 of normal. So what do? Do we multiply my CV by 5? I'd probably win every prize on the planet if that was the case. I see that is oversimplistic and unfair in the opposite direction. But disabilities are complicated, so how do we ensure a fair playing field? Because if we do nothing, I can tell you that certainly is unfair. Final point is, it seems obvious and it's also a little bit vague, but it's something I'd like to sort of talk about and promote, which is just to some extent accepting the diversity that disabled people represent, including their deficits, right? There are some things I cannot do. From my own department, I cannot drive a minibus on a field trip, right? So that's just it. But there are things that maybe I'm better at, and I can compensate to my organisation by being better at certain things. And so we should accept people in the round, accept them for the good things they bring and the not so good things that they bring. To finish with one example, I've just completed 2 days of leadership training at UCL, very timely for this. And at the end of it, the facilitator came to me and said, Paul, it seems to me that your time management skills are much better honed than quite a few of the people here. And I said, well, 25 years trying to be an academic with vision impairment, you can't afford to make mistakes and waste time. And those are skills that not only could I perhaps bring to an organisation who has other disabled people in it, but also to people in their early careers, to students, other colleagues are struggling with that. That is a real strength that has come out of my experience doing the job, but also having a disability. So I'll end there, except with one caveat, which is I'm not an expert on disability. I don't study it. I don't analyse it. I don't collect stats on it. I'm a paleontologist. This is my personal view. But at the very least, I hope this provides a stimulating case study. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to start back and talk about my journey into STEM. So I was born in a mining village in South Yorkshire. Employment was dire. Early 80s, a lot of the mines, collieries were closing down. Employment at that time in my local village was around 80%. Prosperity, nobody had a belief that there would ever be anything else other than a miner in my area. So it was quite bleak, actually. I kind of fast forward to leaving school. I'd not got any expectations as to what I wanted to do in industry. My parents had an academic level of, one of them had one GCSE, well, one O level, and the other one had no O levels. So I suppose if I look back and kind of set the scene, there was not really any ambition. I suppose my view was, well, if I get a job, it's more than what anybody in my family's ever achieved. So after leaving school, the reality was that I'd not got many options available to me because I'd just totally fluked all the tests and failed everything. So the realisation at that moment in time was, what am I going to do? You know, I'm 16 years old now. I've got no prospects. I don't realise what opportunities are there. I didn't know who to turn to. I'd got no role models at all. None of my family had got an education. I'd got 3 sisters, 2 older than myself, 1 younger, so they totally failed at school. At the time, they were on youth training schemes. I'm not sure if people remember back then, but it's probably equivalent to the kind of job seekers allowance now in work. So, it was a difficult time for me. Self-esteem was minimal. I never believed that I'd ever achieve anything in life because the reality is I'd not got any expectations and, you know, there were no role models. But what I did decide to do is I decided that I would go back to college and at least try and fulfil some aspiration or some ambition to go into employment. And at that time, I signed up with an agency and started working as an unskilled labourer just in a local manufacturing plant. Really, really tricky actually, in that I was working 12-hour shifts and then I was going to night school, so, you know, getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning, go to start in industry at 7 o'clock, and then all the way through to 7 o'clock in the evening, two days a week going to college to study from 5 o'clock through to nearly 10 o'clock in the evening. And the reality is, the following year, I successfully achieved 9 GCSEs at grade A, which absolutely I was dumbfounded. I never thought I'd ever be able to achieve anything like that. And when I do look back, I think it was the reality that I was so focused on something and I really did want to change my life and I wanted to improve it. And achieving those grades allowed me to have a conversation with the engineering manager within the local manufacturing plant that I was working in. There were some engineering apprenticeship training schemes that came available, and because I'd now got 5 GCSEs, I was eligible to apply for those schemes. So that was a light bulb moment, and it was life-changing for me. You know, I started earning a salary, I started getting independence, I was going to college 1 day a week, working 4 days a week, and absolutely, you know, building that confidence up in self-belief that I could actually achieve something. But I suppose, you know, I was quite young and, you know, it's nobody in my family had ever achieved anything. So for me personally, you know, just getting that job was a major achievement. And if I'd never done anything else other than getting that, it would have been a massive step forward. So I went on and I went through college for 5 years, achieving a higher national certificate in electrical engineering. And throughout that time, I went on and I became the UK Young Women Engineer. I won the Wakefield College Principals Award for Women into Sciences and Engineering. And, you know, I was kind of dumbfounded, to be honest. And I think probably reflecting back on that journey, for me, it was never about, you know, achieving the awards or anything like that. That was just a natural progression. It was just about the opportunities and actually the thirst and, you know, the love of learning. I'd kind of learnt to learn, and that was the motivation for me. And actually, at that point, everything was going brilliant in industry. And then I wanted to go into university. So I approached the engineering manager. All the apprentices before me had gone on to university. And the harsh reality is that they wouldn't support me to go to university, so I was absolutely devastated. And I took it really bad, actually. I took it really bad. And I thought, you know, I've tried so hard. You know, I've won these awards nationally and locally, etc. And it was pretty, you know, it was the first point, I suppose, after having so much success that I felt like I'd had a major step back. So the reality is I exhausted all avenues and I went down the distance learning route. And I got myself on an Open University degree. So I started with a Bachelor's of Engineering and did that for 5 years. It took me 5 years. It sounds a long time, but when you're working full time, you know, it's really, really hard. And I achieved that. I went on to do a Master's in Engineering with the Open University. You know, and it was life-changing. So I got an opportunity to develop into an engineering team leader. And when I look back at that point, when we start talking about losing people in engineering, there is a massive transitional change in relation to skill sets and capabilities required. So when I actually look back and I look at my role as an engineer, you know, technically I was technically astute, you know, there's no problem on, you know, problem solving issue that I ever faced or encountered that I didn't have concepts or theories that I couldn't resolve, or, you know, I'd got myself to a point where I was quite comfortable talking with other engineers, whether it be mechanical engineers, so I was pretty comfortable. But the reality for me is when I transitioned from being an engineer through to being a leader, at that first team lead role, it was absolutely, totally mind-blowing in that I'd got no P&L experience, I'd got no commercial background, I didn't have a clue what personnel management was, I'd got no idea how to motivate and engage a team. And so that was a pretty bad moment, I would say. And I think when I do reflect on that now, looking at my experience in industry, I think there's got to be changes in the way that people develop. You know, you can be a technical expert, but that doesn't always transition into being a great leader because it's a total different skill set. And my own organisation, we realised that, and, you know, we put people on courses before they'd even transition into being that leader. I suppose best practice throughout industry, you know, my recommendation would be for any industry or even academia, if you're going to transition people from that kind of technical role, whatever that technicality is, into leadership roles, then you've got to get get proactive and understand what those capability or skill sets are. So it was a great transition, well, difficult transition, but then getting the opportunities then to develop and move into, a leadership role. And for about 5 years, you know, it was an amazing journey. And after about 5 years, you know, as a team leader, I was in the manufacturing sector at that point. I moved around. I worked for some major blue chip organisations, and I progressed rapidly. Got great experience, and then I got a job in the utilities. And I transitioned into the water industry, and then the harsh reality of what I thought would be the forefront of industry, technology, I felt like I'd hit a glass ceiling in that it was a very unionised industry. People thought that the water industry, for example, was the most technologically advanced sector, and it was interesting. And I'll talk technical, but you know, the condition-based monitoring, the proactive monitoring of assets in the water industry. I really was, the kind of methodologies we were using in manufacturing in the early 90s. So for me, my view was, well, actually, you're decades behind where other sectors are. So it's quite an interesting journey. And so at that point, what I did realise that if organisations are going to compete, in relation to, organisations having a competitive advantage, that really that capability and the skill set and your core competences within an organisation, you actually need to look wider in industry. So, you know, if you work in the utility sector, there's other industries that use technologies to monitor assets, for example. And actually, you know, it's about sharing best practice. And again, you know, within our own organisation, we kind of talk about diverse thought. But and it's great because we share knowledge across all the sectors. So we've got a power sector, which I work in, you know, we've got a rail sector, and we've got infrastructure sectors, and we always share that kind of diverse thought so that we can offer technologies to markets that are already proven in other sectors. And it's kind of why reinvent the wheel if other sectors are so advanced, and you know, you can share that best practice and that information. So that was kind of a difficult transition really from the manufacturing sector into the water sector. And my career plateaued for 5 years actually. I'd got myself into a head of asset management role there, so it was very technical and I was leading a team of people. It was a role where I was actually managing managers now as well. And again, that was an absolutely total different skill set again. So you can manage your technical staff, but then when you start managing people, it is absolutely so different in that, you know, you've got a group of people that are very driven, very motivated, they want to develop, and the most difficult part of that role really was kind of managing expectations and all, talking around development. From a STEM perspective, it's not always about vertical progression. Sometimes it's horizontal, gaining that, experience in commercial, gaining that experience working with clients, for example, gaining that experience working in, kind of consultancy roles. So it's quite, eye-opening for me. But again, I kind of was thrust into this role and not really had that training. And I think throughout my career in general, I've kind of learned on the job, if you know, in effect. And then I kind of hit, a glass ceiling again. It was difficult when I look back in that I'd got no mentor, I'd got no coach, and I was in quite a senior role within the utility sector. And I think I'd become despondent really because, you know, I'd applied for a senior role, I'd not really got feedback. And for me, you know, throughout life, it's not about, you know, if you fail at something, then that's fine. For me, it's always about lessons learned from that, because how can we improve as a nation? How can we improve as individuals if we don't get that honest feedback? And for that 5 years, I felt like I was just hitting a brick wall. You know, I was developing myself outside of work. I have, just in general, a love of, gaining new knowledge. And that's not always necessarily in STEM, because I think, you need to look wider sometimes. And I've learnt that throughout my journey. Just because I had a degree in engineering doesn't mean that I'm going to be able to lead people or make commercial decisions, because it's not, you kind of learn about, I suppose, CapEx costs and that type of thing, but not necessarily, understanding NEC contracts if you want from a, commercial perspective. So I was at that moment in my life, to be honest, where I thought to myself, do I actually leave this industry? What do I want to do? Because I've hit this glass ceiling and I'm not really getting any support. And it was a really, really sad moment. And so what I decided to do is, right, I'm just going to persevere, because, I can walk away from this, but actually, why would I walk away? I've got a good job, I've got a great salary, I've got great prospects moving forward, might not necessarily be within this organisation, but I do know what's wrong. So, whether I stay here and do get an opportunity or whether I move on, the reality is at least I've learnt a lot from this. And actually, those lessons learnt and reaching that glass ceiling and not having those opportunities has given me so much knowledge. And, I always share that with people that I mentor now. Because the reality is, the harsh reality in industry is that you won't always go, on a vertical progression. And, and I do work with millennials now, and I think millennials, when we get them on our graduate scheme, they're very much, we want to be a CEO in 2 years. And it's, as a leader, it's really difficult managing that expectation. And it's it's great having that enthusiasm. But the reality is, there's one CEO position and we take on, 100 plus trainees per year, and it's just managing that expectation. And so at that point, I did end up moving on, and I moved, my background is electrical engineering, I moved into the transmission industry, thoroughly enjoyed it. But again, I kind of got frustrated because of the kind of mentality, and, again, I kind of went back in relation to decision making, the agile dynamic environment decisions and that type of thing. But, I ended up staying there for 8 years, so I got a lot of, great kind of technical skills and more leadership skills and that type of thing. But at that point, I kind of sat down and reflected on my career, and I'd always been a member of originally it was the Institute of Electrical Engineers. It transitioned a number of years ago. The Institute of Electrical Engineers and Incorporated merged, and it became the Institute of Engineering and Technology. And I was always passionate about, personal development and, having a clear framework of how I need to develop myself. And basically, I set up what's now known as the Horizons Bursary Fund. And that's been going now, I chair that. That's been the opportunity for people to come from disadvantaged backgrounds and understanding how we can get more people into STEM industries that have not got the traditional qualifications. And, for me, that was absolutely a massive achievement. I met the IET earlier this week, and we're doing really well. And every year we're taking on more trainees. So we started out where we had 5, and now this year we're going to be taking on another 25, and that's been going on now for over 4 years. And so my reflection in general about diversity in STEM areas and from industry really is that, for one, within my own organisation now, it's a fantastic organisation. I think what I've learned is that actually, leadership starts from the top. And if you say that you want a diverse and inclusive work, our CEO always says we want a diverse workforce. And it's kind of, don't just say it, do it. So, set out that clear messaging from the top. Secondly, for me, the lack of mentors will not help achieve a diverse workforce. I think thirdly, as professionals, your academics, I continue to study, I'm doing a PhD now. I think it's about giving something back. So my own organisation, You know, I'm allowed to have days off to go into volunteering, whether that's in disadvantaged schools, you know, any area that I'm interested in just in general. It's about actually giving something back. And for me, you know, for my personal journey about increasing social mobility, it's you know, giving people those opportunities. And actually, you know, from my own point of view, I try and kind of send that message out that you can achieve anything that you want. And, you know, whether you do come from kind of a disadvantaged background or you're not quite a grade A student, there will always be something out there for you. But I think as professionals within this room, you know, we have to help and enable those kind of routes in that are from the non-traditional routes. So, you know, not traditionally from universities, but actually how can we support, you know, how can academia support, whether that's free access to training or just a basic insight. Because when I look back to my family, you know, nobody could have actually described what an engineer did and how pivotal that role is within society. So I hope you've enjoyed, you know, my story. So thank you very much for allowing me to be here today.
So, you've heard from our panellists. We have a chance for questions. If you can put your hand up, we do have roving mics, and I think what we'll try and do is take 2 or 3 questions together. The panellists can pick the ones that resonate with them to answer, so we try and make sure we get any questions in the room. So if you can just raise your hand, and then we'll bring the mics around to you. There's a lady here. There's a lady here at the front there.
Hi, this is mainly for Ellen, I think. So the SUSTAIN programme, it's a great opportunity, but my query to you is, when people have got a fellowship already, that's a bit of a leg up already, and there are many people who can't get fellowships, and they're very good. So would that money be better spent using that kind of a leadership programme for people who didn't get fellowships but perhaps were shortlisted or something like that?
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, I'm clearly not in charge of the budget. But yeah, no, I think you've got a fair point. I think we all made the point at the end of the course that actually, so clearly we gained a lot, really quite a lot from that year. And it wouldn't just be female scientists that could gain from it, it's also male scientists actually, and not, like you say, not just people who have fellowships, but for everyone. But clearly, I mean, there's only 20 of us, you can't fund everyone to do it. But no, I agree, it would be better if everyone could have this chance. I completely agree.
Is there something back there?
I'm just curious. I mean, 2 of the speakers have given us, I think, example and food for thought in terms of how research can engage with, if you like, the real world. But it seems to me as an outsider that a lot of academic research is quite inward-looking, even if it's related towards technology, etc., that may impact on society or on the real world. But a lot of it, to me, seems focused internally. And do you think there's an issue about how STEM, if you like, and research engages with the outside world, both in terms of how it's portrayed, etc.?
That's one. And then there's this gentleman here.
Hello, yeah, this is one perhaps mainly for Paul. You referred to the aspect of a hidden prejudice, maybe a hidden disability. Do you think disabled people still are rather inclined to hide their disability because it might disadvantage them?
Maybe if I answer that straight away. So, well, yeah, again, I'm not one of these people who has stats on this easy to my fingertips, but I do have contacts. And something I heard recently at a university I won't name, the statistics were something like that 15% of students were declaring a disability, but only about 1% of the staff. Now, that might just be a historical legacy, and as that 15% feeds through into the future, maybe we'll see more disabled staff at universities. But I think that, you know, particularly with some types of disability, you know, mine it's fairly easy to explain what it is. People have certain expectations, some of which are reasonable, some of which not. But, you know, if you start talking to people about, you know, mental health issues or autism and so on, then it becomes a much trickier area. And I think people are more inclined to hide those kind of disabilities, and that is a concern.
Shakir, do you want to pick up that one about the real world?
Yeah. So I think the question there was, research is often very inward-looking and is there a different way of research engaging with the public or with other kind of stakeholders? Does that sort of summarizes the question? So I think there are sort of two different views on this. Research must be inward-looking because the technical question of research must be known in that community to advance the technical question to go towards that depth. So I think now the question comes, and actually AI is a very good example of this, when science advances to the level that now it begins to have an impact on society, on the way it's changing and thinking of itself, then there becomes a very serious question about how that needs to sort of happen. So one of the things that I think sort of does happen is when the sort of ethical question comes up, that scientists now we all think, what are the ethical implications of the work that we do? And then we can synthesize that in a way that can be communicated with the public, because when the public sees those headlines of bias that came up from Jackie in the morning, then we can communicate that. You know, the Royal Society does an excellent job of helping scientists do those kind of things. And we do have a voice that can be communicated through different kinds of lenses, like the conversation, for example, at media houses or various kinds of things. So, yeah, there's always a tension that every scientist has with themselves to what extent they should engage with the outside and what is the right way to do that. Should they go to school? Should they be on the media? And then there's the backlash that, you know, you get the Hollywood professors, as they're sometimes called. They spend too much time engaging with the public and not enough doing the science. So there's a tension, and as long as we recognize this tension that people have, but I think, you know, the onus is on us always to consider the implications of our work, and as long as we are, as I said, taking that personal responsibility, then we will always find the way and engage in different platforms in different ways.
I can see a few, three hands here. There's a hand just before me.
This is a question to Shakir. There was a point, first of all, you know, really dynamic and a fantastic talk. There was a point you made about the price to pay. And I wonder if you could elaborate, because there's often the narrative you hear now from those that are in power that, look, we're now becoming sort of not an endangered species, but it's often the case that they're the ones that are really sort of in the minority. When really what, if I can use the term, underrepresented groups want is just equal parity. It's not about the other group, the main groups losing power, or there's a price to pay. I just wonder if you could elaborate on that, if that's okay.
And can we take another hand there? So we'll pick that.
So what I was really interested in how is we've seen a spectrum on the panel today from this very kind of challenging approach to the question that was posed and to how much responsibility underrepresented groups really bear to put themselves forward, as opposed to the status quo maybe shifting a bit, heresy, compared to having to meld in and fit that status quo, to fit that persona so that you can get a foothold in the first place. And I was just wondering on how members of the panel feel that what guides their own judgment and in their own careers on that.
Okay, so can we pick up Shakir first and then somebody else with this?
Yeah, so the price of transformation, this is the topic. And it is true, you hear this statement very often these days. We tell the men, you don't need to change, and we tell the women, you are the one that's going to change. This logic seems illogical to me. It cannot make sense. So there seems to be a paradox that people struggle with. Is there a price to pay? And I think I wanted to end with, I think, is the answer to this question, what people fail to realize, that for a while it will seem that you are giving up because you are sharing your power. You are literally giving it to someone else. But the point is that when we share power, what actually happens is that it becomes magnified and your own power is increased. Now, really communicating the complexity of this question seems to be the struggle. We cannot continue to tell, and you've seen this on BBC Radio 4, dredging the bottom of the barrel, the morality of diversity. We cannot be having this conversation. We must take the personal responsibility, and it is not for us in this room to understand. In this room, everyone understands it's a personal responsibility. What we need to do is continue to spread that message When everyone understands there's a personal responsibility, then they will consider that when they give up power, their power is magnified, and then together the baseline is shifted. So that's sort of what I mean, but this paradox of empowerment is sort of, I think, what you are scratching at, and there's a lot to say a bit more about that, but I'll,
Yeah, I still don't think that's the right language. You can't, I mean, for example, it's 100 years of women the right to vote. It wasn't giving up those people for their vote, it was about actually equality.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder, it's the language. It's more than, it's not saying you guys are going to lose power. I like the idea of responsibility. That's a key point. But to say,
let me come back.
But we can talk afterwards.
The reason, just to say, the reason I wanted to put together these 2 points, the importance of the grassroots and the importance of personal responsibilities, because they play together. When you create those groups and when those groups come together, they have a power of creating a demand on their leadership, on their society, and that demand is heard, is seen. And when the demand becomes large enough, then other people react. Now, how you react, I hope in one case, is to recognize the personal responsibilities, and then that personal responsibility becomes magnified into change. But change needs to be accounted. And, we can give examples later about the manifestations of that kind of change. But I think I'm not going to continue supporting the language of telling people, men don't worry, women you change. No.
So does somebody want to pick up the fitting in comment that the woman was asking about that?
Yeah, so I'll talk about my own experience, and I think I go back 2 decades, and the harsh reality is that in industry, if you look at the generational differences, you go back to XY baby boomers, for example, and the mindset of those generations in the early 90s when I first entered industry were totally different to what I believe the mindset is of the millennial generation. And for me personally, the first day that I walked into that particular manufacturing plant is I walked in, there was over 2,000 employees there and 2 women that worked on that site. And the reality at that point of my career is that I had to fit in. And I think if I hadn't adapted to the situations, I would have never been successful in the role. And now, I do mentor females in our own industry. And, I'm always mindful and, I share my experiences. It's getting easier, it's getting better. People have to have a responsibility. But the harsh reality for me is that this kind of messaging starts from the top. And if you've got a leadership team that embrace change, that set out, that are transparent, that's, we talk about, for example, in our own organisation, last year's intake, 50% of graduates were female, 50% of graduates were male, and we're very open, honest and transparent about it. And for me, it's about, if these are the organisational values, it's not just having values, it's actually demonstrating that, we are, doing something to change that perception and actually offering, kind of different routes into our industry, which is traditionally male-dominated.
Okay, so we can take these last 2 questions. This lady, and there's somebody in the middle there, at the back there.
Me first? Right. Okay, I'll go first then. Thank you for the inspiring talks. I have a question that is about Ellen's experience, but not necessarily to Ellen. So anyone feel free to address it if you can for me. The program you attended seems amazing, but also very expensive, both in terms of provision, but also your time, your energy, 20 of you going through it. So presumably there was some sort of training need to be fulfilled there, that compared to your male counterparts, there was an identification that you had skills that needed to be boosted through a systematic program like this. Do you feel there was such a difference? And if so, why would such a difference occur between men and women in your field?
In my field? Oh gosh, so the scheme was open for people who had fellowship. So I come from a physics background where there aren't very many supervisors, professors that are actually female. And I think it's well known within my field that there is a problem. We do need to get more females in leadership roles. And so I think from my background, I think it is important to try and get our generation and try and kind of give us the confidence that we can go ahead and hopefully fulfill those roles, and therefore kind of get more women into physics. You can see that there are some women doing well, at the top levels in physics. But I can't speak about the other sustained participants. I think there were lots of medical sciences where maybe it's a bit more balanced, male and female wise. Does that answer your question?
Maybe I didn't ask it clearly enough. I was just wondering if I'll try to rephrase it. Do you feel that compared to your male counterparts, you needed this kind of training more in order to achieve a similar...
Yeah, okay, sorry. Yeah, I compared to males that are possibly in a similar situation to myself, I can see them going forward and applying for things and kind of networking more, going to more conferences. And, I'm jealous, that they are able to do this. And maybe, so I kind of put myself back from these things because I'm kind of frightened of, failing and so on. So I don't know, for me personally, it's useful to have this kind of training to kind of boost my confidence that, I can do this compared to a male counterpart.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to wrap this up because we're out of time, but I want to say the final word because I have the mic and I can. And I'm not used to being quiet, those of you who know me at all. I think there's something about where the data demonstrates that at the top of the office, whatever organisation, there's an underrepresentation of talent from diverse backgrounds. There's nothing wrong with getting an escalator, which is fast tracking. So, everybody on this panel is brilliant and capable. It's about the additional bits that may be missing because they didn't have the networks to tell them how to, connect with the media and all the other fabulous things that they get access to that actor and all the other wonderful things. For example, with Sustain, that fast track escalator, we need talented people who can get on that escalator to quickly change the face and the landscape at the top, so we have the role models which we heard about at the beginning that are so necessary to inspire people to say I can, and absolutely that next generation to look and see people like me or like them who say, yeah, I think I can do that as well. So thank you very much for being an engaged audience. Can we give another round of applause for our fabulous panel?